Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream.
Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Assuredly, I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here once again for episode 66 of the Bible Lens podcast. And tonight is probably going to be my most controversial topic of the entire night. You think to yourself, okay, well, you talked about Islam, you talked about Catholicism, you talked about Mormonism. There's a lot of unhappy people with you right now, specifically because you talked about these false religions. What can possibly be more upsetting than speaking against people's religions? Well, about speaking about the current relations of the genders in both male and female in the church today, and why not only is it broken, but is the modern church actively hostile against men. So this is going to require a very, very deep dive here tonight, and we're going to be hitting on a numerous different aspects here. So I need you guys to follow with me. I need you guys to stay with me. I'm pretty sure that some people are already going to be typing out comments before they even watch the full of the stream, the entirety of the stream, and they're just going to get mad at certain sections of this. We'll get to that here later on tonight because I got a whole bunch of things lined up. We're going to try to get through it as quickly as possible here tonight. Go ahead and let you guys know right now, we are live on Rumble and we are live on YouTube right now. This might be the last stream on StreamYard because I think we're going to be moving over to another streaming platform this week. And I think the Bar Room will be the first one that we'll test out on tonight. So it should be a very, very interesting week. So there's a lot of things we're going to have to put together for the context of that stream. But we'll worry about that later on here. Let me introduce some of you guys who are joining us here. I know Vanya's joining us here as well, saying hello to everyone. Vanya, I did say that I was going to send you something. I just haven't sent it to you yet, but you will get it this week, and I will make sure that you do get it because you did ask for it, and I did tell you that I would get it to you, so I will get it out to you this week. Obviously, just a lot of things in transition at the moment, but I will get that to you as quickly as possible. Leslie Tarkin is also joining us here today, saying hail to all you lovely people as well. Like I said, we're going to have people trickling in throughout the course of tonight's show, so we should get started here. And this is a very, very intriguing topic, and the reason why I chose this one is because there's been a lot of videos from a lot of content creators who have somewhat addressed this topic over the last couple of weeks or last couple of months, and it's one that you're not going to hear anyone in your modern church really talk about or really address, because I think the church in a lot of ways today are doing men a huge disservice, because there's clearly a problem happening right now between men and women, and there's clearly a divide that's happening, and it's not just here in the United States. I know we all like to think that everything in the lens of just the United States or it doesn't happen, but this is happening worldwide. And we really need to talk about why is it right now that it seems like men and women are completely separating from one another. And when you ask the church about this topic, their primary response is to, well, okay, well, men and women aren't dating anymore, they're not getting married anymore, it must be the men's fault. And then what they do is that they center all of their sermons or their doctrine towards the men, and they really don't bring the same energy to the women here. But what's actually happening in the church, and why is this causing so much debate and so much back and forth here? Well, let me go ahead and get started, kind of like a background for me, because I can give you a little bit of insight of what's going on based on my experiences and based on what I've seen. So obviously I am a single male, no kids, not married, haven't been married. And I look at it from this perspective too, because for you guys who haven't heard my story here, I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about my background. Obviously, I'm born and raised in San Diego, California. I spent many years out there. Throughout my 20s, I used to host numerous events in Southern California that were kind of like these 20 and 30 like meetup groups. We would go to like different type of bars. We would go to different type of events. We would do things like bowling, go out for drinks, go out for like music nights, stuff like that, nightclubs, something that we can bring a bunch of people together, a bunch of single 20s and 30s people, and try to get them to mingle and stuff like that. There was a few successful relationships that launched to that. I don't know the status of any of these relationships now, unfortunately, so I can't tell you that all these people are still together to this day, but we did a pretty good job like matchmaking and stuff like that. And over the course of my years like doing that and things of that nature, it was really I would get to know people, mostly men and women. Some people I still consider friends to this day. Some people we've had falling out with. Hey, it's life, it is what it is. But what I've noticed is that there's an incredible awkwardness with our generation of people, both single men and single women. And I've seen this firsthand, that the perception always is that, okay, well, if there's awkwardness or singleness going on, it must be because of the men, that the men are the problem here. The men are the sense of conflict. I will tell you this right now. I have seen firsthand, there are just as many awkward, what's the best way of really putting this together? 'Cause I don't want to insult anyone, but there's just a lot of awkward, antisocial, socially awkward, socially anxious women out there in their 20s and 30s, as there are men. So it's not just a men problem. It's not just an incel problem. I've seen it firsthand with many, many women. There was a woman who's, I remember this for several years ago, and she was a woman who's like a taller girl, maybe like 6 feet, 6'1", and you could tell that she was like really, really uncomfortable being like around like a group of people. So I was kind of like in a position where it's like, okay, I could see her kind of be awkward and whatnot, but I wanted her to mingle in with the group. So I figured that okay, if I make myself a little bit awkward as well, just to kind of give her the vibe that, hey, look, you're among friends here, it really doesn't matter, you don't have to be like freaked out or anything. But she was so emotionally kind of crippled in that sense that she really just had a really tough time with clicking with people, right? And like I said, I've noticed this from many, many people that I've known back in my time period. So I've seen firsthand from a secular standpoint the interactions between people in their 20s and 30s. Now, like I said, this is in San Diego, this is in California, a lot more leftist of a city, so you can say that maybe that's not a great litmus test, but if you look at the grand scheme of what's happening here in the United States, you can look at it as an example. For me, myself, I have not been on a date in 2 years. I went on a date a couple of years ago. Went to a couple of dates with a woman that I was seeing at the time, and things were going great early on. However, the reason why things ultimately broke off is because, while everything seemed great on face value, there was one night that we went out and we just so happened to go out for drinks. And let's just say that, once she had a couple of drinks in her, she revealed her true self, and it wasn't nearly as attractive as I thought it was. And put it to you this way, things broke off pretty soon right after that, right? So unfortunately, that's kind of like the way it is. And like I said, I've been doing this for a while, to the point where I'm just kind of like, me myself, it's like, hey, look, I'm not really too worried about trying to find the right one during this time frame. Now, of course, would I like to have kids? Yes. Would I like to be married? Yes. But at the time period, I understand that it's not exactly the atmosphere to be going into relationships blindly and going into relationships just for the sake of, oh, I need to be married, I need to have a kid. I also know a person who, I'm not going to reveal their name here because they may be listening to this, but it's a person who, and this is a woman, by the way, just in case you're wondering, who was so obsessed with, obsessed, I should say, with getting married and having a kid because she felt like her biological clock was ticking, and she wanted, and I tried to warn her at the time. It's like, hey, look, don't just rush into, a relationship to have a kid because you feel like that you have to have one, because you may rush into a relationship with the wrong person. And like I said, didn't listen to me because just little old me, whatever. Ended up getting to a relationship with someone. They ended up having a kid very shortly afterwards. And almost immediately after having that kid, everything fell apart. And next thing you know, they're in ugly, custody battle, and it's a whole thing, right? And I could just remember thinking in the back of my head, it's like, I warned you of this exact situation, and now here you are, right? Now, that's something that I know from the past. I'm not going to mention the person's name here, but it's a situation that they're still dealing with to this day. And of course, when you're talking about, now you were in a position where you weren't married and you didn't have kids, and now you were married. Now there's children involved, and there's this whole legal situation involved. So it's like, you had a situation where you didn't have these problems and you were rushing to find that person. You didn't vet the person properly. Now you have a whole new course of problems to deal with. And this is what stops a lot of people from getting into relationships, especially serious relationships, is because they look around in the world and they see people who, they see people who are examples of what not to do in a serious situation. Let's put it this way. We all hear the stories about, rising divorce rates. We all hear the story about nasty custody battles, legal battles, about, oh, my wife divorced me and now I have to give up half of my earnings to her. I have to give up the house. I have to give up this and that. And now she wants custody of my kids. I can't see my kids as much as I want to anymore. So people hear the stories, single people hear these stories, and they see these stories, and they probably know a multitude of people who fit this category of people who are just like, man, I really don't want to end up like that person. Like, I really don't want to end up, because here's the thing, and we'll talk about this here in a second. The church doesn't view singleness as a gift like the Bible does. And here's what I mean by this. There's a lot of people in the church that will tell you that if you're single, it is at any real age, but especially like a certain age, like our demographic, that there's something wrong with you. Like you're the problem here, that you need to grow up. You need to start taking responsibility and stuff like that. So the church doesn't view singleness as, well, this person is free from these burdens that come with relationships, that, like, especially if you get into a bad relationship, you have to bear for the rest of your life. They don't view it as that. They view it that, no, married people are the goal and single people are the problem. Meanwhile, the single people are looking at the married people, or now the ex-married people, and they're thinking to themselves, wait a second, why is the messaging here rushing me to essentially get into a relationship where if I don't pick the right person, it's literally going to have a negative impact on the rest of my existence. That's literally what's going to happen. If you get into the wrong relationship with the wrong person and you end up getting married, or God forbid you have children and it's not the right person and they cause you misery and unhappiness, that is a lifetime of negative consequences that you're going to have to deal with, and it doesn't get better. I used to be an accountant as well too, so I wanted to correlate this as well. I used to make decent money, people. I'm not going to just not bragging or anything, but I did. But I used to be an accountant, and I used to look at people's payrolls, right? That was part of like the job, looking at people's like tax returns and payrolls. I saw front and center the amount of people the amount of money that people had to pay, that their wages got garnished because, oh, this person has a child custody lien, or he has like a child support or alimony. I've seen people get their wages garnished because of prior relationships. And let me give you a little spoiler alert here. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. Like, some of you guys who just work regular jobs, you look at your check and you think to yourself, oh man, it's like the government just stole all my money. It's like, I made $1,300 this pay period and I only got back $900 because the government robbed me. Well, imagine losing another $450 per pay period because you had essentially a court mandated court lien on your payroll. So that's even less money that you have to make, meaning that you have to work even harder to make less money than you did before, right? So I've seen the reality of when things get really, really bad, and it's not pretty. It is not a pretty situation at all. But we live in the world where everyone expects everyone to just get married and link up and be happy. But in the reality is that, no, in the United States, I can only speak for the US. I know there's certain nations where the problem is far worse and it's far better. So I can't speak for everyone's nation. Like, I know, like, Russia, for example, has a terrible track record with marriages. Like, they have one of the highest divorce rates in the entire world. If you go to somewhere like, I don't know, let's throw Spain out there, for example, as an example. Maybe it's not as bad as Spain as it is in Russia, but some places are better than others. Here in the United States, over the last several years, the divorce rates with married couples has been somewhere between 40 and 50%. It's been somewhere within that range there, which means that half the people who get married end up getting divorced. And that's where we get all these ugly legal battles, the custody battles, and all this sort of thing associated with breaking off a marriage. And there's a lot of single people who are now seeing the consequences of this with their own two eyes. And they're just thinking to themselves, hey, look, I don't want to be involved in this. It's like, I don't want to have to be, the person who's 30 years old. Now he's divorced. So I'm a divorced dad at 30 years old. I got 2 kids to raise and I'm paying alimony to my ex-wife who's already moved on to somebody else. And it's like, they're seeing the landscape and they're just like, you know what? I don't want to be a part of this. And I know what, the Bible say, I know what the church says, but I'm seeing this with my own 2 eyes. And this is not a situation that I want to be in. But is the reaction from the church to assist single men who view like this, who have this mindset where it's like, hey, look, I want to get married, I want to do all these things, but the landscape just isn't in my favor right now. I don't think it's a wise idea for me to get married. But the problem is they're going to church and the church is telling them, well, actually, you're the problem. And there's the people out there who are wondering why the men are leaving the church at the rate that they're doing right now. Because you look at a lot of modern churches, it's actually majority women in the churches right now. We'll get to that here in a second, because there's a really deep dive I want to go into about why that is the case. But there is a problem happening here. There is a divide with men and women, and no one seems to be really talking about what is the root source of this, especially in the church. So Spartan joining us here says that it might take a while, but even Jezebel got hers. I agree with that as well. Let's start here because, like I said, this is a topic that modern churches really aren't going to topple. I'm not just talking about like the Joel Osteen churches and stuff like that. We'll talk about them here in a second. But as you see here, it's not just them. It's a lot of churches nowadays. But I want to read this here and start off with this. This is a verse from 1 John, and it's chapter 2, 15 through 17. And this is very, very important. Like I said, no one's really going to teach you this, but this is something that you have to keep in mind, especially if you are a single Christian male and you're thinking to yourself, man, I really want to find that one person, but it just doesn't seem like that she's out there for me, and I'm just getting rejected left and right and all the sinner and whatnot. Here's something to keep in mind here. 1 John 2, 15 through 17 says, do not love the world or the things in the world. For anyone who loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world. And the world is passing away in the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. Now, we've mentioned this many times before. What is the will of the Father? The will of the Father is to believe on Jesus Christ. It says that in John 6, 40. That is the will of the Father. So this is a message here that do not love the world, because in the world is essentially an opposition of God. So if you find yourself, put it to you this way, this is the best way to simplify it. The closer you are to God, the more of an enemy you are to the world. And vice versa. The more of an ally you are to the world, the more of an enemy you are to God. So a lot of single guys are in this position right now where They're God-fearing men, they want to stay strong to the faith. They don't want to do things that, everyone tells them not to do. So it's like when you talk to these pastors who always have lectures for single men, it's always the same thing over and over again. It's like, you need to stop watching porn. You need to stop fornicating. You need to stop playing video games. You need to get out of your mother's basement. You got to do all these things. And the reality is that a lot of the guys, especially young Christian guys, that's not really their issue. Their issue is not that, they're just all porn addicted and playing video games in their mother's basement. That's not really what's going on here. And by lambasting guys and lambasting men in general, saying that, that's kind of the fundamental problem here, you're not getting to the root cause of what is happening. And you're doing a lot of people a disservice by doing that. So we're going to talk about the problem here. So here's where this is all going to start. I'm going to play this video here for a second. So this right here is Andrew Tate. And I've talked about Andrew Tate a couple of times on this show and a couple of times on our bar room as well. For those of you guys who do want to, before we start typing in comments, I am not a fan of Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is a devout Muslim. I am very, very much against Islam. A lot of his core beliefs come from the tenet of Islam, which I completely and utterly disagree with. So don't try to take this as me being an Andrew Tate mark. I'm not. But for those of you who don't know who Andrew Tate is, over the last several years, there has been a big, what's the best way to play this? There's been a big uptick in his popularity, especially among young men. And the reason for that is that the young men who are going through a lot of issues in the dating scene right now and married life and just life in general, he says a lot of things that are typically they agree with, a lot of things that, statistically are correct. And it seems like he's one of the few voices out there that actually gives an ear to men who are struggling with these issues. Now, the church has come out very recently against guys like Andrew Tate. We'll talk about this here for a second, but it's like, well, why is it that, this guy seems to have the ear of so many young men? It's because he's one of the few people out there who seemingly understands, at least on face value or on the surface level, what they're going through, and is actually man enough to actually speak out about this. And you don't get a lot of that from modern pastors today. So let's talk about this short video here. We're going to play a little clip. This is just Andrew Tate talking about, one of the biggest issues going on with men today.
We talk about weak men. This is what's scariest about this entire agenda they're trying to purport. Because their ideas, like the feminist idea and like the mainstream idea and like Logan Paul's ideas, all their ideals is if we weaken men, then if they become weak enough, they'll no longer be a threat. And I argue that point absolutely. I think the most dangerous men on earth are the weak men. I think inside of every single man, we're born with a fire inside of us that if we do not control, can destroy ourselves and other people. And if you look at men who have no emotional control, because that's what they're trying to teach us to have. They're saying, listen, you're a man, you're allowed to just cry all the time and have no emotional control, no stoicism, just react to your emotions. Do you know what happens when you tell men to just react to their emotions? Anger. You have school shootings, you have rape, you have violence. That's what happens when you tell men to have no emotional control. These school shooters are kids with no emotional control. Rapists are men with no emotional control. Violence and the bullshit you see on the street are men with no emotional control. Telling men to not be stoic is going to create a breed of violent young men who have no emotional control, can't control their emotions, and act out on them. That is absolutely and utterly more dangerous to society than me coming along saying, listen, I don't give a fuck how you feel, young man. It doesn't matter how you feel. You have duties and you have responsibilities as an adult, and you must comply and act a certain way, regardless of how you feel. That is better for society as a whole, especially as I'm only teaching the tenets of, listen, go to the gym anyway. Doesn't matter. You don't feel like it. Go anyway. Listen, your girlfriend left you. Your heart's broken. You're not allowed to stalk her. She doesn't want you. Get the fuck over it. What I'm saying is good for the world. They're saying, no, act out your emotions. Cool, you're creating stalkers, rapists, and school shooters. These people are fucking dangerous.
So that's one of the clips there from Andrew Tate. And like I said, he's gained a lot of popularity with young men who are in the dating world, who kind of see a lot of things that are happening between men and women today and notice that there's a big divide. And like I said, the church has had a problem with trying to counteract his influence because they don't want men, especially young men, to listen to Andrew Tate and to be influenced by him. Now, on face value, yeah, sure. Did Andrew Tate say some things that you would typically agree with? Yes. But does he also come from a source that you would not agree with as a Christian man? Absolutely, yes. Now, on face value, you think to this, okay, well, you don't want young men to, listen to Andrew Tate and be influenced by Andrew Tate. So you have to ask the question, well, who should they be influenced by? They should be influenced by the church and the leaders within the church. Now, here's the question. What is the message that the church is giving to these same young men versus the message that Andrew Tate seems to be giving to these young men? Unfortunately, when you look at a lot of modern churches today, the message seems to be in condemnation of these same young men who are going through, these struggles, who are looking at the dating scene, and nobody really truly acts this, especially in the church. We'll talk about this here in a second. It's like, what's the best? No, I'm going to save this one for a later video because I want to set this up a little bit better here. But let's play this here first. This is Mark Driscoll. Now, Mark Driscoll is a very, very controversial pastor, just in case you guys don't know. Basically, he started off, I believe, in the Washington state, where he had a church out there. He had a fallout, a pretty ugly one, with a lot of the church leaders in Washington state. He seemed to make it seem like it was more of a political thing, like they were opposing him because of his political opinions. They were basically saying that, he has a clear cut, anger issues, that he tried to assert church discipline. Essentially what happened was he moved from Washington to Arizona and started a new church there. He didn't try to intermingle with Calvinists for a little while, but that didn't go very well either. So he's a very, very polarizing figure. A lot of people either like him or really don't like him, but obviously his focus on one of his ministries is obviously to focus on young men and to build up young men and build up strong young men. However, he's another guy who goes into this mindset that, well, if there's a conflict here and there's a reason why men and women are not dating each other, it must be the men's fault. So this is one of his sermons here for single guys. It's entitled "Single Guys Watch This to Get a Wife." I should say. Seriously, it works. Here's Mark Driscoll's view of the problem, and the problem in his estimation is, of course, men.
I'm going to tell you some things I've been telling our kids since they were little, and they're doing way better than we did, and their marriages are off to a better start. So let me start by speaking first and foremost to or about single men. Don't raise your hand because I'm about to insult you. So the way this works,
which is always a great thing that you want to hear when you're in church. And I'm going to make a point of this here in a second, but I really want to play this video here before I get to that point.
Single men today are not in a position where they are ready to marry. They've actually created a category called NILF, N-I-L-F. And what this is not in labor force. We used to call it deadbeat, but instead we decided to have an acronym. There are now a record number of able-bodied young men not in the workforce. We dealt with this at Real Men recently on a Wednesday night, and I'll revisit it briefly. See you guys on Wednesday night. But today, there is a record number of able-bodied men who are not working full or part-time jobs and have no intention of doing so at any time in the near future. In addition, there are 7 million men just not in the workforce, not doing anything. Ladies, let me just ask an honest question. If you are single, do you want your man to have a job, yes or no? Yes. See, a lot of times guys don't understand. Guys are like, I bet you she really is into my car stereo. No, she's not. No, she's not. No, she's not. She could care less.
So obviously he's talking about the fact that, y'all young men out there aren't working jobs. Now, part of that is what, a big portion of this has to do with some of the decisions that we have made as a country over the last several years. And I think he does talk about it a little bit here as I go later on in this clip. But obviously, if you guys remember 4 years ago, we basically told everyone to stay at home and not work because people were getting sick. And that ended up doing reprehensible damage, irreparable damage to our economy and to our country in a multitude of ways, because essentially we just paid people to stay home for 4 years to the point where they didn't want to go out and work, because they were getting, let's say, the equivalent of $15 an hour to stay at home and collect money from the government. And the best job offered to them at the time period was like $16 an hour, because they wanted to find a job that makes more money, but they just couldn't find it anywhere. They're like, well, if staying at home is barely giving me a little bit less dollars than actually working a job, then I'd rather just stay at home. And that's what happened to our country for a long period of time. Now we're moving back here where a few years fast forward and we have record inflation and prices are going up on everything and the wages are going up, but the wages aren't meeting the rate of inflation. It's very, very difficult for men to go out there and find a job that's actually going to be suitable for a woman. And here's what I mean suitable for a woman. Because we all heard this meme now, like this whole thing. I need a man who's like 6 feet tall, 6 figures, and all this like nonsense, right? So, and if you listen to a lot of these, online videos on TikTok and Twitter and stuff like that, you will hear a lot of women say that, well, what's your ideal income for a man? Like if you want to go out date a man or marry a man, how much does he has to make in order for, him to be suitable to you? And a lot of these women make up these ridiculous numbers like $400,000 and all this like ridiculous stuff. And you think to yourself, do they realize that not that many men out there actually make that much money? But we'll get to that here in a second, because that also is a key problem here. But put it to you this way, there's guys out there who probably are making like $60,000 a year who would still be viewed as unattractive to women because in their mind he doesn't make enough money, right? At my height a few years ago, before I got laid off due to the economy crashing, but the economy is great. At my height, I was making roughly $75,000 a year at my height. That was just a couple of years ago before I got laid off at my mortgage gig, when I was actually pretty it was pretty fruitful for the time that it existed. But like I said, $75,000, a lot of you guys are probably looking at that. It's like, that's like twice as much as I make now. Well, trust me, I'm not making that anymore, but I was making that at the time period, right? But I know a lot of guys out there who work decent, high-paying jobs, working, like I said, $60,000, $50,000 a year. But if a woman has it in her mindset that, her man has to make more, well, then getting a job simply isn't going to solve all your problems. So if the message here from that aspect is, well, if you want a woman, get out there and get a job. It's like, okay, you can go out there and get a job. It may not be a job that she finds attractive. Then you're basically in the same position that you were in before. And now, now you're just lonely with a job rather than lonely without a job. So we have to be very, very careful about when we offer solutions, because a lot of people, and you got to take this with a grain of salt too. A lot of these pastors that we're going to be talking about here, these are people who have been married for a long, long time. These are people who haven't seen the dating scene since like the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s. These are people who have been married to their wives for a long, long time. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong about that. What I'm saying is that these are people who have absolutely no concept of the modern dating game right now as it is. These guys have been out of the game for several decades. And these are the ones offering advice to single men who are having to deal with essentially the complexity of what dating is right now. So we got to be very careful with that too. But let me continue a little bit here with this video.
In fact, what she wants is a Bible and a job. Those are her love languages, okay? So what happens
that's another thing. Like, don't say that, well, if you want a woman, if you want to get married, just know the Bible and have a job, because there's a lot of guys in the church right now who know the Bible and have a good, decent paying job who still cannot find a woman. So again, be careful with the advice that you give people, especially when that doesn't apply to them.
Then is today young men are not ready for marriage. And part of it is the government just destroyed an entire generation and their future a few years ago. Oh, let's talk about that. So what happened was this thing called COVID hit, and the government said, hey, be a good citizen, go home, sit on the couch, and don't do anything. And a lot of young men said, oh, for the rest of my life? And that's kind of what they heard. So a whole generation of young men goes home who are not at high risk for COVID anyways, and rather than working, they just go home. And what happened then was they left the labor force, and who did they live with? Their mother. So a record number of young men left the labor force and also moved back in with their mother. We now have record number of young.
Now, yes, that is partly true. A lot of young people did end up going back to their parents because of the way the economy worked. And when they weren't allowed to work, they couldn't afford to have their own place, and ended up going back to their parents in order to work and save money. Now, was that a lot of men? Yes. Was that also a lot of women? Yes. So again, framing here, because like I said, this particularly applies to both sides, not just men, but men are the ones getting the lecture here.
Young men not working, and a record number percentage-wise of young men, 20s and 30s, living with their mother. Okay? So let me just ask the mothers, is this a good idea? We just found the problem. They're like, I don't know. Okay, we'll ask the fathers. Men, is this a problem? Yes. Louder, quicker, more certain. We've just hit the parenting breach. We've just reached our problem. Now, what we see as well today, 63%.
Now, here's where it gets very, very interesting. I do want you to pay attention to this because he highlights a very, very key problem here. However, he comes to the wrong conclusion to why this is a problem.
What we see as well today, 63% of young men in their 20s are not dating a gal, not intending to pursue any woman. They're just out of relationship. Only 34% of young women are single.
So, and I know he's going to continue his point here, but I want you guys to understand what he just said here. He just said that 2/3 of all single men are not in a relationship. However, only 1/3 of all women are not in a relationship. So imagine this. You have 2/3 of all men who are single, yet only 1/3 of women who are single, which lets you know that there are far more single men than there are single women. Now, like I said, he highlights this problem. However, he comes to the wrong conclusion. I'll get to Cider here in a second.
Okay, and I got this from the CDC. So we're just following the science. So let's say 2/3 of men aren't in a relationship, but only 1/3 of women are not in a relationship. How does that work? Thanks for asking. There's two answers. Number one, younger women are dating older men or more than one guy.
Now, listen to what just happened there, because he said that women who are single are either dating older men, yet a guy in the audience said that they're dating more than one guy. And he tries to rebuke him here by saying that, that's a dirty mind. That's not it. It's like, is it though? We'll get this here.
That's a potty mind. That's a potty mind right there. That's a potty mind. Wow. Sir, Old Town is down there.
So you notice how uncomfortable he got when somebody noted that, oh, hey, maybe the problem is that women are just jumping from one guy to another, and maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe that's part of the problem of getting into a relationship, is that it's hard to actually find a woman who has not already been with multiple men before she's met you. Maybe that's a significant part of the problem that young men are facing here today. You notice kind of how uncomfortable the room got when somebody brought that up? Now, keep in mind, this entire sermon is essentially lecturing men, right? And all aimed at men and the problem with men. But the second that somebody kind of turned it just a little bit about, well, could this possibly be the problem, and points it at the woman, everyone in the room gets uncomfortable. Think about that for a second. And then I think he goes on here to basically say that, well, another problem is that, well, if the women can't find a man to date, then she'll go on to date women. So essentially, men are being blamed not only for women not being able to find a suitable man through singlehood, but if they go into promiscuous relationship with both men and women and resort to homosexuality, then that's also a problem on men too. Because if men were actually willing to date these women, then they wouldn't go out and try to date other women, which is an aggressive and egregious oversimplification of that problem to sit here and say that, well, actually, it's men's fault that women are dating other women. It's actually men's fault that women can't find a suitable man. It's like, is that really it? Is that really? And keep in mind, this is the church, right? So it's like, you don't want people to listen to Andrew Tate, fair enough, but then you turn to the church, people who we're supposed to be listening to, and this is the message that we're giving men. Cider here real quick says, my first fiance was my high school sweetheart, together for 6 years. Things went downhill when I got sick. 2 weeks after we broke up, she shacked up with a guy 12 years older than her. Yeah. And this is another point that we'll have to bring up here on tonight's show too, is because this would be a key point when I'll get to it here. It's that there's a lot of women out there who want to be married. There's not a lot of women out there who actually want to be a wife. And here's what I mean by this. When you get married, you take a vow that for better or for worse, for sickness or in health, that you're going to be with that person to the day one of you two die, right? But as we see here, a lot of times, the second that something bad happens, or if a woman gets uncomfortable with a scenario, it could be just life happening. It doesn't have to be something that he did particularly. But if he gets sick and he loses his job and they have to spend the next couple of years struggling because he's not fit enough to do work, well, that's not comfortable enough for her, and she'll go off and find somebody else. And then, like I said, the man is the one essentially stuck holding the bag after the fact, right? And like I said, single men heard these stories, they know these stories, they know people who these stories apply to. So you can't just sit there and say that, oh, well, you're just making it up, or oh, you're just, being too hyperbolic. It's like, if people are seeing this with their own two eyes and they're hearing it with their own two ears, and they know people who have experienced this, that is going to influence their decision. My second fiance couldn't deal with my sickness, and we didn't have the same attitude about intimacy. Yeah, like I said, it sucks. A third fiance was a single mother, appreciated everything about me. She was 8 years older than me, fell apart when I didn't want another woman in our bed. Every time we did an after action report, they told me I was intimidating because I wanted to build a future, right? So no matter what happens to you, it's always your fault. And this is what so many men have been told over and over again, that no matter what the landscape of what's actually going on in the world, somehow you're always at fault. And after a while, when you've just been hit in the gut time after time after time again, you start growing resentful towards this messaging, right? You start getting resentful for being told that no matter all the pain and suffering that you've gone through, that somehow this is all your fault. I even hear people go as far to say that, well, hey, if your woman cheats on you, maybe that was your fault because maybe you just weren't giving her enough attention, so she went and found it somewhere else. And this is something that, a lot of guys have picked up on. And like I said, they've grown very resentful towards this. It's like, why is it that I'm always held to a standard that she is not held to? Why is it that always that when she does something to me, the first reaction from people who are supposed to be, the leaders of our church, the leaders of, whatever male group that you're a part of, is that, oh, well, maybe you should have done something better. Maybe you didn't do something that led to her, getting to this point, right? And like I said, a lot of guys just get really tired of that. But here's another one. Here's John MacArthur. Now, like I said, we're going to move over to even the Calvinist side of things. So you think to yourself, oh, that's just Mark Driscoll. He's a nut. He probably shouldn't even be a pastor. You don't have to worry about that in other circles. Well, here's Calvinist John MacArthur giving yet more advice for single men. And look at who he points to as the reason between the loneliness between men and women.
Marriage is the grace of life. Marriage is the most fulfilling relationship in life on every possible front. And this particular culture we live in today has postponed that more and more. It seems like every year the average marriage age gets older and older and older and older. And this puts tremendous pressure on young people to maintain purity when they have reached the age where they would desire to be married and desire to start a family. So all I can do is to exhort Christian people not to get caught up in what you said, not to get caught up in the perfections that this society drags in front of you, which are not related to reality. I think you have to look at yourself, and this may help. You have to look at yourself in the way that Paul described marriage in Ephesians 5. He basically says that a husband is like a savior to his wife. That's essentially what it says. And I think the burden really lies with men to see themselves as those who rescue women from loneliness, who rescue.
Now, a couple of things here, because I'm going to play this again because something happens right after he says this. But essentially what he's telling the men in his church, the single men, that you have to put yourself in a position where you view yourself as a savior to rescue women from their loneliness. So, like I said, here, what's happening here is that men are essentially being blamed, putting the burden for not only their own loneliness, but the loneliness of women as well. Now think about it like this, though, and here's the $1 million question. Okay, a woman is lonely, she's in the church, she's single, she wants, a good man, but she can't find it. You'd be like, okay, I'm gonna step up and be the good man that she's looking for, and I'm gonna rescue her for her loneliness. I'm gonna save her from her loneliness. Okay, well, here's the problem here. What if she doesn't want to be saved by you? That seems to be the $1 million question here that nobody wants to talk about. What if she doesn't want to be saved by you? Maybe in her mind, she's thinking to herself that, well, if I can just find, a good looking, tall, attractive, godly man, and I think I even played a couple of these videos on the Barroom, actually, if I'm mistaken. There was this one video, I'm not sure if you guys remember this, about a year ago. I played this video of a woman who, there was this trend online at the time period, on like TikTok or Twitter, where all these women were talking about, there's no good men in the church. Where are all the men at the church at? And she's going on to describe what she wants as, her ideal man. And she goes on to quite literally describe Tom Cruise. I'm not even making this up. She even named him by name. It's like somebody who has this, that, and it looks like Tom Cruise and all this stuff. So in their mind, these women who are online talking about how lonely they are and whatever the case may be, they want essentially a godly man who loves Christ, who has a great job that's high paying and can support a woman and be super, super attractive. They're essentially looking for a Christian version of like Tom Cruise or Glenn Powell and all that. And I hate to break this to you, you're probably not going to find that person in the church, or if you can find them at all, right? But a lot of women think that they can find this person. So what happens is that they hold out under the expectation that this person is going to come along one day and that'll be the person who's going to snag them up. Meanwhile, all the other guys who are in the church, who are single, who are godly men, who meet all the other qualifications outside of, well, they don't look like Tom Cruise, they're the ones that get ignored. They're the ones that are like, okay, yeah, I want to be rescued, just not by you. And this is the big problem here. Men and women need to know that it's not okay. That it's okay to not be married. Even Paul said it's okay to not marry. Fulfillment from God, not spouse. I will say this too. Mark Driscoll is a guy who preaches this, which I completely disagree with. And you do see this with a lot of modern churches. Like I said earlier, when there are single men or even single women for that matter who are in the church, who are serving, who are being godly, who are learning the word, they are viewed as a scourge to the rest of the church, because we all know that the church values married couples more than they value single people, right? And this is kind of a big reason, what problem that we have here, because in the eyes of the church, if you're not married, you need to be married, so you need to work on getting married. And that's the pressure that we put on a lot of people not understanding this, right? Most women lie whenever they say they want a good man. They just want the next guy that will date him because they don't want to be alone and actually be in love. We'll talk about that here in a second. I know a lot of married women who are lonely in their marriages. And that's another thing that you hear a lot too. Like, there's a lot of women who are married, claim that they found the guy, and all they can talk about is how unhappy they are with their man. And you think to yourself, okay, so the single women are unhappy because they don't have a man. The married women who have a man are also unhappy because they don't actually love, or they're not actually attracted to the person who they're married to. Most of that, and I hate to put this on you, most of that also has to do with the fact that in their mind, they still think that they can do better. In their mind, they think they settled with somebody who's not the ideal man that they had in their head. And they're still thinking about that ideal man who they haven't met, who probably doesn't exist. So they're more unhappy being in an actual relationship. And then keep in mind, if you're a man, this is another burden that you have to carry, right? Imagine actually being married, yet your wife is not happy with you, or your wife wants nothing to do with you. Imagine having to put up with that burden as well. Then he goes on here. I want you to listen to this. I'm going to play this one more time here, and then listen to the reaction of this for a second.
Those who rescue women from loneliness, who rescue women from being in an unfulfilled life, from being in a place where they aren't protected, they aren't provided for, they aren't cared for, they aren't loved, they aren't given the opportunity to have children. So from what I would experience in our society, it's the men that have to step up. And I honestly do not know what in the world they are waiting for. I have threatened many times to line up all the single women on one side, all the single men on the.
So I want you to listen to what just happened here, just real quick. The second he says that it's up for the men to step up, and then he goes on to say that I don't know what the men are waiting for. You guys need to step up. Notice the subtle applause from all the women in the church who start clapping and applauding. It's like, yeah, you guys are the ones who need to step up. So I want you to picture this here for a second, and you're starting to wonder why there's so many men who are leaving the church. Imagine you're a single guy at the church, right? And it's not a fact that you're not a real, true, genuine, Christian. You're a solid Bible believing Christian, but it's like you're in your 20s and 30s and you want to find a wife, you just can't find it because either the women in the church don't meet your standards of a wife. We'll talk about that here in a second, or you find someone that you think fits that standard, and she's also single, and you go to her, but she doesn't want anything to do with you. She doesn't want to date you. She doesn't view you as an ideal male, right? Or as an ideal mate, right? So you're struggling to find a woman in the church because, hey, what do we tell single Christian guys all the time? It's like, hey, don't go find women in nightclubs and in bars and places like that. Go find a good girl at the church. That's what we tell men all the time. But then they go and try to find a good girl at the church and they can't find one, or the women there are rejecting them. Then you sit there during the sermon at your church and your pastor is literally lambasting you, saying that you're the reason why not only you're single, but you're the reason why she's single. And then the women in the church who have already rejected you start clapping like seals, and you start looking around thinking to yourself, why the hell am I even here? Well, why in the world am I even here at the church if this is the way that I'm being treated at my church? And then you wonder why people leave, and you wonder why people start listening to Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and all these other people on social media. It's like there's a cause and effect here, and the question is the church part of the cause that's leading to the effect? What do we have here? A fellow can get distracted and make his wife feel behind, but I say both sides look for approach in a physical matter, not a spiritual one. I agree. Being a Vogue cell, it kills me dating women who want me to be physical because of my life and faith. I can't bring myself to do that anymore. Like I said, I know that there's a lot of guys out there who are struggling with this, and like I said, there's not really a voice out there, especially in the church, for those guys, unfortunately. The kid in the far left, the one in the background, yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, I saw him there too, so yeah, exactly. The cycle starts from a woman being a little girl to all these princess love stories. Yep, the Disney has certainly had not helped this problem whatsoever in any way, shape, or form, right? So that's even in John MacArthur's church. So even the Calvinists are not exempt from this. Here's another one that I want to point here from Paul Washer. And Paul Washer kind of repeats the same thing that everyone else has been saying, that if there's women out there who are lonely in the church and they can't find a good man, it's the men's fault. And here's Leslie says that I feel like John MacArthur really put that young man down and didn't help him at all. Exactly. And if these are the people who we're supposed to go to for help, what do you think that's going to end up leading to? But here's another one here from Paul Washer, highlighting the problems with single women and single men at the church. And who did he point the finger at? Well, we'll figure this out here.
Do you know how many young girls, no, young men, you listen to me. I travel all over, even here. Even in my own church, how many young girls between the ages of 25 and 35, godly, smart, intelligent, strong, capable, and they say, are we going to be single all our life? Our only option is to be single all our life, or to entrust our lives to boys our age who, when they get a little bit of extra money, buy cool tennis shoes or another video game.
So two things are happening here, just not one short clip here. I want you guys to pay attention to what just happened. He started off by saying that, I know all these great godly women in their 30s and their 20s who, they follow all the rules. They're the perfect woman, but then they cry to me all the time. It's like, am I going to be single all my life because I can't find a good guy at the church, right? Two things are happening there if you're paying attention. One, you have to understand this, and this is a big part of the problem. This is a big problem why churches do this as well. When women in the church can't find what they deem to be a good man, quote unquote, they will go to the pastor and complain about the fact that they cannot find a good man at the church. And a lot of women in modern churches today do this. And here's what you have to understand. A lot of these women who are single, who quote unquote can't find a good man, there's just none at the church whatsoever, They'll go to the pastor, they'll complain, and then the pastor hears all of these complaints about all the women in their church talking about how they can't find a good man. There's no good man anywhere in the church. And the pastor goes like, oh man, this must be a pretty big problem. All these women are coming to me saying that there's no good man in my church. Let me do a lecture to correct these men so that these women out there can find themselves a husband and be happy, because clearly the men are the problem here. Let me ask you this, a single man. When was the last time you went to your pastor to complain about you can't find a good woman at your church? When was the last time you've actually done that? A lot of guys have not and probably will not go to their pastor and complain to the pastor that I cannot find a godly woman at my church. I cannot find a woman who I want to make my wife at this church. They won't do it. That's not something that men typically complain to their pastor about. But women will. So that they're only hearing the complaints from women that there's no good men at the church, and they're not hearing anything vice versa, what are they going to think? They're going to think, okay, well, clearly the men's a problem here. And clearly, it's the guys here that need to step up, that need to change. And say, you're helping the fellow by telling him to build a castle in the right way. You will find him building it. My most memorable relationships were random when they weren't, when I wasn't looking for them, they found me. Exactly. And I think a lot of guys would attest to that too. It's just like, when a guy is focused on finding like a woman, even like I said, even on the flip side, a woman is focused on finding a guy, things usually don't end very well because you're trying to force a relationship to happen. You're trying to force a connection to happen that may not be there. And like I said, you end up with the wrong person and you think to yourself in the short term, oh yes, I found that person I was always looking for. And then things go sour very, very quickly. And now you dealing with a whole new level of misery that you weren't even dealing with when you're single, but now you have to deal with it after the fact, after everything's fallen apart there. So that's a big problem here too. And keep in mind, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, the women in our church is unhappy. It must be the men's fault.
What are we supposed to do?
Now, not to mention, once again, he's sitting over there saying that, oh, well, the problem is that you guys in your video games and you want to play video. First of all, as a former gamer myself, you guys who have been on the bar room and people who have seen me on like Cold Classic Cage's stream, this very, very well. I've been very open about this. I still have a PS3. For those of you guys who don't know, the PS3 came out in 2006. The reason why I still have a PS3 is that about 15 years ago, once I started working, I had so little time in my life to play video games. There was no point in me spending $500 on a PS4 and a PS5 because I'll be lucky. Like even now, I'm lucky if I get to have an hour, maybe 2 hours in an entire week to play a game that I actually want to play. I just don't have the time for it anymore. I just don't. Not to mention, if we're being completely honest with you, even for those who are gamers, video games kind of suck to be these days. Video games are not as good as they were 20, 30 years ago. So there's no draw for people even playing video games from that aspect. But these boomer preachers out there still think that, oh, it's the guy just sitting in his home playing PlayStation all day and he's the problem. It's like, look, there's guys on like Twitch who get paid like $6 figures to $1 million playing video games these days. Like, it's a whole industry here. Let's not sit here and pretend like the one thing that's keeping men and women from getting married is the Xbox. That's not what's happening these days. Like I said, it's this whole thing. It's like, oh, well, you're not getting married. It must be because you're too addicted to porn, or you're too addicted to video games, or you're living in a basement with your mother. It's like, that's not really what's happening here. And a lot of these people aren't paying attention to what's really going on here. Yeah, exactly. And you notice that as well. I don't recall hearing a pastor sermon about being a godly woman. I've heard plenty about being a godly man. We do cover it on Saturday class. And that's true. It says PlayStation sinners will become PC paladins. Yeah, absolutely right. But like I said, this is part of the problem is that we're not really tackling the root cause.
Brothers, the Chinese say there are no bad students, just bad teachers. What kind of legacy did you leave? Some of you were laughing. What kind of legacy have you left? What have you done? I am not going to stand here and curse the darkness and make fun of a younger generation. I'm not going to do it. Because when you look in Israel, a generation was raised up who did not know the Lord. And whose fault was that? The previous generation. Yeah, you guys might not be playing video games, but a lot of you have wasted so much of your time doing the stupidest, silliest things of which men are beyond that. No.
So I want you guys to understand what's happening here. According to Paul Washer and the people, the women that he's talked to all around the world, the women are absolutely perfect right now, and they're just awaiting a Prince Charming to save them. It's the men that needs to get it together. You guys are the problem. The women are already set. You guys are the ones that need to set up and get your stuff together. So you just heard a separate sermon from Driscoll, a separate sermon from Washer, a separate sermon from MacArthur, and they're all repeating the same thing, and it's all pointing at the men. If there is a problem with singleness and loneliness, whether it's a man or a woman, it is the man's fault all the time. And after a while, when you just sit there and you hear your leaders lambaste you over and over again, like you're already single, you're already dealing with loneliness, you're already dealing with unhappiness because you can't find that woman out there that everyone keeps telling you need to go find so you can get married and have children and be fruitful and multiply, yet you're struggling to find that woman, and then everywhere you turn, the finger is being pointed at you, that you're the problem, that you're not doing enough, that maybe it's because you don't have a job, or maybe it's because you don't make enough money and you need to make enough money, or maybe it's because you haven't laid off the video games. Maybe it's because you watch too many dirty movies. Maybe it's because this and that. And you think to yourself, why is it always the finger being pointed at me? Especially in cases like this where I'm not the one suffering from the things that I'm being accused of suffering from. Exactly. And this is the message from the church. This isn't the message from the world. This is the message coming from the church. So why is it this? There's an underground hookup culture in many churches today. No one's talked about it. No Christian wants to be a Jezebel man or woman. Oh, let's talk about that here. Let's get to the nitty gritty here. I broke down this in, was it 5 or 6 parts? I think it's 6 parts in total. And I wanted to kind of bullet point this to talk about what I believe is the biggest problems with the singleness of the church, even from what I've seen. Because look, I've been in a few like singles groups in the churches, and let me go ahead and just tell you this. For what I've seen, being a part of more than one, and I'm not throwing anyone particularly under the bus here, so if anyone's gonna get mad and be like, oh, he's talking about my group, I'm talking about a lot of groups, so calm down your ego. Here's the problem here. I've seen people in a lot of these single groups in the churches where they're all separated from each other by gender, right? Which is part of the problem, because let's say you go into a singles class and you go into a room and it says somewhat decent sized room, yet you walk in and what's the first thing you see? You see men on one side and women on another side, right? That alone can be intimidating in itself, because you have to go and it's like, okay, well, do I sit with all the other men? It's like, okay, I'll just sit here all the other men because I don't want them to be awkward and whatnot. And if I sit with the women, maybe the women will look at me some kind of way. So you're already overthinking it in your mind. That's part of the problem. And then 2, when you're in these groups, you realize that there really isn't that much intermingling going on between the 2 groups. And if you're going to do a singles group, I would think the point of doing a singles group is that, okay, here are people out here who are clearly looking for, love, who are clearly looking for the right guy or the right woman. Maybe through the lens of the church and through the peer view of the church, we can help these women and men find somebody so that they won't be lonely. They can get married and do things, quote unquote, the right way. I get it that you don't want to have people fornicating, which I'll let you talk about that here in a second. But what I've seen here from more than one place is that it's a problem, because the whole point of the singles class, people are not actually coming together, which is like, well, why are we even doing this? And then 2, people tend to click up when they're in these singles groups. So you may notice this, you go into a singles group and the women automatically click up with other single women, which can be a problem in a relationship as well. Like, I know that that's something that's not really talked about too much, but you can have other women negatively influence your girlfriend or your wife to do something very, very stupid that can directly affect the happiness of your relationship as well. So that is also a problem that not too many people talk about, but we'll say that one here for another day. But You have a lot of women who click up with other women, and then the men kind of like intermingle with men. So yeah, it's great to find fellowship with other women and other men, but then you realize no one's really fulfilling the entire purpose of us actually being here, which is to find someone that we can find happiness with. Another problem is that in the rare cases where somebody actually does get married or does get engaged or does become a couple, they stay in the class. So when you find out, and I've felt this as well too, you go into a singles class and half the people in there are already in the relationship. And you think to yourself, doesn't that defeat the entire purpose of a singles class if everyone's already in a relationship with one another? Because now your odds are even more limited than it was if it was a full class to begin with. And no one seems to see this as a big problem as well. It says, why aren't they blaming promiscuity and not being faithful, especially to someone you claim to love? Yeah, I'm coming to that. We're gonna land this plane towards the end. Like I said, there's a big elephant in the room that everyone's dodging here, and it comes to this one. So in a lot of churches, the core concept of a singles class is broken just from those issues alone. And then let's be honest, I've seen both awkward men and awkward women in these singles groups. So I know a lot of people like to say, oh, it's the men that are awkward and they're weird. And, you know, if they're not in a relationship at a certain time period, that they're kind of off-putting. Once again, it is not just a male problem. I have seen awkward women and awkward men in the same age group, and they all act the same way and have the same problems. So then to make it seem like that it's just one way or another, I can name several people off the top of my head, but I won't, because, you know, I won't do that to people who probably still aren't in relationships right now. But as the first problem here, as we've explained here with some of these videos, is that, like I said, men are being blamed for both the loneliness of men and women. So what is this a recap of? The church sees the man as the problem no matter what the issue actually is. They think that, you know, the church essentially is actually trying to lecture against men, thinking that by condemning the men or by shaping them up, quote unquote, that will get them to turn themselves around to get serious and go find a wife. And it's like, okay, let's say if you do that, it's like, okay, you know, I was playing Sonic the Hedgehog too many times now, and now I'm ready to go out there and get a wife. Now, where am I going to go? The church. Okay, let me go find a wife at the church. I can't find one. You're in the exact same position that you were in before. That's a problem. Why? Because the church clearly doesn't understand the issues of modern dating. It's like I said before, these pastors have already been married for several decades. They haven't seen the dating age since Sylvester Stallone had like the #1 movie in the country in 1984. Like I said, I'm not knocking these men for being married and staying in long marriages. What I'm saying is that they're completely ignorant of the modern dating scene that the kids and the men that are in today's age group are experiencing right now. They don't know. Like I said, there was, understand this, in 1984 or 1974, whatever year your pastor got married to his wife, there was no OnlyFans during that time period. He didn't have to worry about his potential wife selling pictures of her butt on social media and on OnlyFans and being on porn sites, stuff like that. He probably didn't have to worry about the fact that, you know, his wife, before he met her, had already slept with, like, you know, 30 guys before they had met. Like, she had already had like 7 relationships, and she's already had sex with like 40 men before they had ever gotten together. Like, these were issues that primarily the men of that time period did not have to deal with today from the prospect of being a single man. But that is something that these guys today absolutely have to deal with and absolutely have to discuss, because they're the ones who are dealing with this problem today versus the ones before. Now, keep in mind with this. The church loves to lecture men about watching porn, right? And I'm not saying that that's bad, but here's what you have to fail to understand here. You're always lecturing men about stop watching porn. Porn is bad. Porn is the worst thing you could possibly do. And we never ask the question, okay, who's making the porn? Who's profiting off the porn? There's a lot of women right now, like you guys have seen like the reports. I think like OnlyFans admitted that it paid out somewhere between like $6 to $8 billion of content money on their platform in just the last few years alone. $6 to $8 billion. Now, let me ask you this. Is that all men that are making that? No, it's not. It's primarily women. So it's like we think of porn like it's somehow exclusively a male problem. It's not exclusively a male problem. If you don't understand that, then you're only lecturing people on half of the problem, which is why we're in this position to begin with. But another reason here is that the reason why a lot of guys are leaving the church and why they're not going to church is because, as you've seen here, if people like people we just played there are your pastors of your church, they're not offering you a voice to the men. They're only offering a voice to the women. Because if the women are the only ones who are getting their voices amplified by the pastor, where's the men lie in that scenario? And the answer is they're not there. They're absolutely not there. I'll get a couple comments here. My singles class growing up were having sex outside of marriage. Older and divorced groups were like that too. There's no awkwardness. Yeah, that's going to hit on my primary point here in a second. The pastor addressed it from the pulpit, but it did not stop. I can imagine. Remember when women back in the 90s and 2000s were normal and accessible with stuff like OnlyFans, toxic relationships? Yeah, I can say that. I will say this, and it's kind of a sidebar issue, is that you can see the over-sexualization of our culture even in the 90s and the 2000s. However, it wasn't nowhere near as bad as it was today. Like, if you want to talk about the problems of our, at least in America, I can only speak for our country, but where it really started in society, you can go all the way back to the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the 1970s, where it really blew up to a point where we're here now suffering the consequences of it. Because, like I said, our modern culture, aka the world, they always look back at like the 1950s like it was just the worst possible time in human history. It's like, oh my god, the women were just barefoot and pregnant and they had no freedom and all this other stuff. And what was the 1960s all about? The 1960s were all about rebelling against the 1950s, and then progressed even further with the 1970s when you start adding in sexual immorality and drugs and all of this other stuff. And then somehow in that time period, those people became parents, and then they raised our generation, right? And then the next thing you know, our generation ends up screwed up. So now we're 20 years after that, and we're even more screwed up than the ones beforehand. By the way, I made it to marriage. I'm glad you did. Drake's here as well. David here said there's another type of porn for women in romantic novels. How many Christian women go to 50 Shades or Twilight? How many Christian women love watching Hallmark movies? And I'm not going to throw Hallmark movies completely under the bus here, but let's be very honest. What is it selling here? It's selling this fantasy. And you guys have seen, if you've seen one Hallmark movie, you've seen them all. Some career-driven woman in her 30s, you know, super successful, comes back home to a place that she hasn't been to in several years, and she just so happens to run into that one guy that she had a crush on in high school, who's also single, who's also super good looking, and there's a little bit of a conflict there, but eventually towards the end of the movie they come together and they realize that being a career woman was all worth it because the guy that you're waiting for is still out there waiting for you. That's pretty much the whole thing when it comes to those Hallmark movies. And there's a very, very big fan base with those type of films, especially in the Christian community. Let's be honest here. Hedonism in our culture has grown since ever. We're all teens and Roman ones. Absolutely. Like I said, especially in our culture here, like in the United States, but obviously you go back to Babylon and stuff like that. Everything that we're seeing now is nothing new. But here's another Hallmark is still popular, Lifetime too. The Christian romance novels are as well, absolutely. So here's the big problem. Here's the real reason why men and women are so opposed right now. And I hate to break this to you. This is what's going to offend a lot of people, but this is what needs to be said right here, right now. We tell men, especially single Christian men, that, hey, if you want to find a good girl, don't go to a bar, don't go to a nightclub, don't go to Comic-Con or all these weird secular places. Go to the church. Go to the church. Find yourself a good God-fearing woman who believes in Jesus. She's at the church. She's waiting for you. That's where your wife is. And on face value, that's good advice, right? On face value, that's what you want to say. Because look, there's a lot of downtrodden women at the nightclubs and the bars. I know from experience, you do not want to date those women. I'm just going to throw this out here for you guys just in a sec, but don't want to date those women. It's not worth it. But we tell them to go to the church because, hey, the women in the church are different than the women that are in these clubs and these bars and stuff like that. But here's the problem. The women in the church are not Christian. And that seems to be the biggest elephant in the room that nobody wants to discuss, is that the majority of women in the church today are not believers. Well, what do I mean by this? The majority of women in the church right now are not Bible believers. They have not believed the gospel. They have not accepted the gospel. Now, these people will claim that they believe in God, or I'm pretty sure you guys have heard this too. This is my all-time favorite. God spoke to me, or I spoke to God and he told me this. And all of these women just have these incredible relationships with God where they're talking to them and God's talking to literally them and nobody else, right? You all have heard this, right? And it's always, this thing of like, how do we get here? What's the problem here? The problem here is that in modern churches today, secular women dominate the church. Secular women dominate the church. And it's these women who, here's how they ended up getting here. Women want forgiveness, but they don't want forgiveness through repentance. What do I mean by this? A lot of women, especially modern women who find themselves in the church today, have found themselves in the church because they have done some very, very debaucherous, shameful stuff in their past that they want to forget, right? They've probably chased away friends, probably chased away family members, whatever the case may be, due to their decisions, and they're looking for somebody to accept them. They want to go to the one place where they can find acceptance, and whether they go to the church. And once they get to a point where they're at the church, they're like, okay, I want to turn from, my bad ways. I want to find forgiveness through the church. I'm going to find forgiveness through God. Here's the problem with this. A lot of these women want forgiveness, but they do not want repentance. And here's a very, very important part here. If you all know this, and this is something that I'll touch upon here in a second. There's a lot of modern churches, especially the really, really big ones, and we all talk about this all the time. These modern churches don't talk about sin. They don't talk about sin, that they're very, very weak on sin. They don't want to bring up sin. They don't want to convict people of sin. And everyone knows this. We all talk about, like I said, the Joel Osteens, the Mike Todds, the Andy Stanleys, the Stephen Furticks. We all know those names. We all talked about the fact that these are all pastors that are very, very weak on sin, and we always complain about them and talk about them, but we never ask the question, why is that the case? Now, is it easy to grow a church when you don't talk about sin? Yeah, actually it is. And you notice that a lot of these churches that have big, huge attendances are the ones that are the lightest on sin. But we also have to ask ourselves this question. Remember I mentioned earlier how the majority of the churchgoers these days are women? So if women are dominating the church, and a lot of secular women are dominating the Christian church, what's going to happen as a result of that? The church is not going to talk about sin. The church is not going to convict people of sin, because our mindset is that, okay, when a woman sins or if a woman has a past, and we don't need to talk about that past anymore because she's a new woman, we're going to move forward. We're not going to condemn you of sin. We're not going to convict you of sin. And we're just going to stop talking about it altogether. So what you have here is this overabundance of women who have very, very questionable pasts, who gotten to a point in their life where they just be like, you know what, I'm gonna go get baptized. And they get baptized, they think to themselves, well, I'm a Christian now, I'm a member of a church, I'm a member of God's family, and God speaks to me now. And what is the problem with that? What is the glaring problem with that mindset? The glaring problem here is that these women are under the mindset that if I just dunk myself in the water and get baptized, that means I'm saved, that means I'm one with God, and that means that I'm a Christian now. What does the Bible actually tell us about baptism? In every instance, faith precedes baptism. And there's a lot of women in the church now who have gotten baptized who don't even mention the name Jesus, who think that Jesus is somehow completely separated from God. They'll never even mention Jesus' name, but they got baptized and they're Christians now. And you think to yourself, well, wait a second. The Bible has stated even many times in the book of Acts, go to Acts 16, 30 and 31, that that person had to profess faith in Jesus Christ and believe in Jesus Christ before they ever got baptized. And the big problem with a lot of modern churches is that we're just completely skipping that whole step of believing in Jesus Christ and just dunking people in water. And as a result of that, these people think that they're saved. They think that they're Christian. They think that they're part of the church. And they're not. They're absolutely not. And no one's calling this out within the church because, well, that's going to upset some people. If you tell them that their faith is not genuine, that their faith is not a saving faith because their faith is in the fact that, well, I got baptized, so that means that I'm good, right? No, that's not what it means. And I remember there was a video we played several months ago where this woman got baptized, and during her baptism, she was talking about how God placed her here to be a fighter for animal rights and all this just weird stuff, never mentioned Jesus once. And then the pastor said, well, in the name of the Holy Spirit, you're saved, and dunked her in the water and let her go about her day. And everyone's like, well, wait a second. Like, you can't do that. That's not how this works. And we don't tell people that that's not how this works. So what does this happen as a result? As a result, there are a whole bunch of women in the church who basically are fundamentally the exact same women you see in a nightclub and in a bar. They're the same woman. So these Christian men are not only being dominated by secular women, they're essentially being rejected by these secular women because these secular women aren't actually looking for quote unquote godly men. They're looking for a godly man who meets the secular ideals of what they want in a man. So you have to meet all these secular ideals of a man. And then the caveat is, oh yeah, but he also has to believe in God. And that's the metric here that these women are operating on. So a lot of these secular women also hold the same feminist viewpoints of, their faith in the church that they had before they were Christians. It's still there. So you're basically dealing with the same woman who rejected you from the world, who's now in the church doing the exact same thing. And this is a woman who's still addicted to her feminist ideals, who's still dominating in the church, still doesn't want to submit her authority to a man, and absolutely loves drama, right? This is another big problem here. How many people, especially in the Christian church, do you know who love watching shows like The Bachelor, who love watching shows like Love and Hip Hop, and Netflix has like a multitude of these drama shows like on here. You think to yourself, who's watching this? Overwhelmingly, it's women. Why? Because women, especially modern women, love drama. But you know who doesn't like drama? Men. Men are not looking for drama from their women, but women, especially secular ones, are very, very addicted to drama, and that's going to create a divide. Because if you want a man, or if you have a man who wants a peaceful life with a peaceful wife, but you have a woman who's addicted to drama and can only is attracted to drama, well, you're going to have a big problem there. If you guys remember on the bar room several weeks ago, we talked about this with Lucy Hale, who's an actress who I guess recently in the last year or two got sober from alcohol. But, she was talking about her past love affairs with men who were drug dealers, who were giving her drugs. They were high all the time. And she still has this affinity for, the drug dealer man who brings all this drama and torment to her life. But she loved it. She's addicted to it. And she went on to talk about how the men in her life that she was dating that were trying to get her better, that were trying to get her sober, she didn't like being with those guys because in her estimation, this was her own words, those men were boring. They weren't quote unquote fun. And a lot of women have that mindset where they don't want to be with a man who's viewed as boring, who's viewed as virtuous, who's viewed as godly. I'm going to play a clip for you guys here real quick. This is from a Christian channel called Christian For Real. He's growing his channel. He's at 4,000 subscribers now, but he does very, very good content, holds strong to the gospel. He played this clip here. Now, this is one of these YouTube dating shows or social media dating shows. You guys know the whole concept here. They bring out a man, or usually it's a man from what I've seen. I'm not sure if they've done women as well, but they bring out a man and all of these women stand in the line. And if they don't like the man, they can pop a balloon and then they ask, well, why did you not like this man? Why did you get it? Why did you not choose him? So I want to just play just a quick minute of this. And I want you to highlight kind of the problem of the mindset of modern women who, believe it or not, a lot of these women have the same mindset in the church too. Now, this is a guy who he's going to explain to you, his values and stuff like that. He looks like a pretty decent guy, good looking guy. You hear his story, you think to yourself, why doesn't everyone hate him? Well, you'll figure it out here in a second.
26, and what do you do?
So I'm a Marine vet and I'm a Christian recording artist. So, you know what I mean?
Okay. So. And what are some things you look for in a woman?
She got to be God-fearing for sure.
Hello. If we can start off with your name and age.
My name is Jasmine. I'm 24.
Okay. And Jasmine, why did you end up popping your balloon?
I think you're very handsome,
Sure.
But it's just not really my type.
And Asia, why'd you end up popping your balloon?
No particular reason. It's just feel like not really my type. Yeah.
What kind of makes him not really your type?
A little taller.
I just feel like more like close friends. You're attractive. I like it all, but
I popped my balloon because
I'm an ominous, and I don't want it to get to a point where it's just like it becomes forceful in a situation. Like everything you list is cool. Like, and I kind of graduated from religion.
So, listening to that short clip here, what's happening here? You have a guy who's, good looking, in good shape, Christian values, military guy, has his own business, he's pretty successful in life. He's everything that a woman would tell you that they're looking for in an ideal man. Yet everyone here rejected him. And why was the reason why they rejected him? Oh, he's not his type. Or it's like, no, you're more of like a friend than like a boyfriend, and all of these secular, nonsensical excuses. Now, you can sit here and you say, oh, well, come on, wait a second. These are all, secular women. These aren't godly women. These aren't women at the church. Are you 100% certain that every single woman in your church does not share the values of these women? Like I said, if you're at a church where a woman just dunks herself in the water and thinks that she's saved and still has all the secular values that she carried over before her baptism, and now she's in the church looking for quote unquote a godly man, and she sees a guy like this who should be the ideal man, the ideal catch, and they're still rejecting him, let me ask you this problem. Is he the problem here? Because he'll go to his church and the church is lecturing him that, well, you're the problem. Maybe you're not doing enough. Maybe somehow, maybe if you stop playing video games, and you see the disconnect. There's a clear disconnect between these two groups. Remember some channel describing the massive church that had a 90% turnover rate because they did not mention sin. Yep. Women bring these Jezebel spirits and they help it grow. Absolutely. Awesome one is here as well. And Christopher Dominguez is also here saying that you have to acknowledge the son as well as the father. Yeah, you would be shocked at how many women who I've spoken to who claim to be Christians and don't even know that Jesus Christ is God. Like seriously, and these are the people who, and I have to like be like, who are you talking to? Because these are women who would claim that God speaks to them and they've had all these conversations with God and they don't even know Jesus Christ is God. So if you don't even know Jesus Christ is God, you've never come to this realization before, yet you're claiming that God speaks to you all. Who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Because clearly it's not God. I've seen two churches split due to drama caused by the tongues of gossiping serpents. The church I grew up with is going through it now. Yep. And like I said, this is the gossiping hens that always lead to, the downfall here. I was getting recommendation for some women's Red Pill channel pointing out that the so-called Christian influence women blame men for all their issues, even Christian men rarely blaming themselves. I'm just throwing that out there. Many women in the church want to date a bad boy or a Christian bad boy, and they get upset when the bad boy behaves like a bad. Yeah, exactly, right. And like I said before, I even started off the show talking about this. Is the First John says, "Do not love the world or the things that are of the world, because the love of the world is not the love of the Father." Right. And as I mentioned earlier, the closer you get to God, the closer you get to Christ, the more you're going to be hated by the world. And think to yourself like this. If these women see these Christian men who are doing everything by the book, the way they're supposed to be by the book, and they're not attracted to them, these type of men give them the quote unquote the ick. If that's what's happening here, let me ask yourself this. Is the problem here him or the problem here you? Is the problem here that he's a good Christian man who holds biblical values, who's doing everything the way that God told him the way to do it, and you're not attracted by him? What does that say about you? Are you so connected to the world that you become an enemy of things God? So ask yourself this question. How many women in the church are actually unattracted to the biblical qualifications and the biblical attributes of a man, because the biblical attributes of a man does not meet their worldly standards of what they think a man should be? Could that possibly be part of the problem? A coworker said the women, they went to church, they said that they were also bi. It's another problem. Like I said, the people who are in the church, the women who are in the church, are not Christians. And that's a big, big problem for both men and for women. And honestly, for the health of the church as well. But what else do we see here? Let's take this down for just a second. What else are we seeing here? Well, if the women in the church are not actually Christian, they're not going to submit to the authority of a man. And the problem is, like what we were saying earlier, it's like, why is it that 2/3 of men are single, but only 1/3 of the women are single. Well, the problem here is that, let's be very, very blunt here. A lot of women don't respect men to submit to them. And they don't. The reason why a woman won't date you, especially in a church, because, and this is going to be a bitter pill for a lot of young men to swallow, but you have to hear it. The reason why she doesn't want to date you or wants nothing to do with you, because she fundamentally does not respect you. Period. She does not respect you. She does not in any way, shape, or form see herself submitting to your authority at all. And that's why she wants nothing to do with you. And sometimes it is a hard pill for a lot of guys to swallow, but you have to hear it, because a lot of guys, they'll get rejected and think to themselves, well, maybe if I change or do something else, then maybe like you can try to do that, but it's not going to work. When a woman has made the decision that she wants nothing to do with you, you're very rarely ever going to be put in a position where you're going to change her mind. And let's be very, very honest. The amount of work that you're going to have to do at that point to change her mind of how she views you, is it honestly even worth it at that point? Because if you do somehow get to a point where she somehow repents and changes her mind, what does that say about her and what does it say about you? Like, I'll really sit down and think about that one for a second. And another big problem here with these women, and this is something else that a lot of people don't want to talk about. All of these women have a vision and a dream of getting married. All of them. Every single woman has a vision of a dream of being married, because she loves the idea of having a wedding that's all about her. She loves the idea about getting a super expensive diamond ring that he probably spent 5 figures on. They all love the idea of getting married and taking all these pictures and having a day that's all about them. Every woman wants to get married. Very few women actually want to be wives. And that's the big problem with marriages now, is that a lot of these women are not getting married because they want to find a man who they want to be led by. They want to get married because in their estimation, they want to be the person who is doing the leading. And this leads us to our other big problem. And this is probably the biggest one that you're seeing in the world right now, not just in the church, but in the world. Why is it that so many men or women are not getting, are not hooking up with one another? Why they're not dating? Why are they so opposed? Is because now in the not even just in the United States, but in the world, men or women are rapidly becoming more opposed to one another politically. And what I mean by this, if you look at the statistics of where men are going and where women are going, the women all over the world are becoming more and more leftist, becoming more and more progressive. So women in the world, especially the single ones, are adopting more left-wing progressive ideals, ideologies, beliefs. That comes with feminism, that comes with being pro-abortion, that comes with, being pro-LGBTQ, being all these things. They're becoming more and more like the world. Meanwhile, the men are becoming more conservative. The men are becoming more conservative. They're becoming more Christian. They're becoming more biblical. And what's happening here is that the women are going this way and the men are going this way. And that is a huge, huge factor in the fact that these people are not hooking up with one another again. Because think about it like this. If you're a man, a good Christian man who actually adheres to the words of God, who actually adheres to what the Bible says, would you want to date a woman who, let's say, believes that transgender children are a thing and believes that transgender children are okay? Do you want to date a woman like that? Do you want to date a woman who is pro-abortion? Do you want to date a woman who is pro-LGBTQ and holds the tenets of feminism and intersectionality and all of these wacko weird? Do you really want to date that woman? I'll use this as an example here. Jessica Alba. Now, I'm just throwing her name out there just because. Jessica Alba is probably one of the most attractive women in all of Hollywood. I don't think any heterosexual man would say otherwise about Jessica Alba, right? So clearly, when it comes to Jessica Alba, looks is not the problem here, right? We can all agree with that. But Jessica Alba is also an extreme left-wing personality, which means that everything that you see coming out of the left-wing, Democrat the party platform, she is 100% on it all the way. So think to yourself this question. Is she so hot that you are willing to deal with all the other things that come with her because she's attractive? Think about that. I will even go a step further. Megan Fox. Megan Fox, especially several years ago, now I know she's had a lot of plastic surgery since then, so I mean, but Megan Fox several years ago was one of the most attractive women in all of Hollywood, right? Not a single heterosexual man said that he would not want to have a woman like Megan Fox. Look at where she is now. Well, we talked about Megan Fox several times on our bar room. She's now a self-professing witch. She does witchcraft. She goes around with her boyfriend, Machine Gun Kelly, doing a whole bunch of debaucherous things. She has 3 kids now with another man. And for some reason, she's raised them all. They're all boys, but she's dressing them up as girls, walking them around as girls, parading them around as girls. It's like, is that your ideal woman? Is that your ideal wife? Is that someone that you want to be with? Another example, let's throw another one out there. Charlize Theron. I know I'm using extreme examples of celebrities, but I'm using this to make a point here. Charlize Theron, right? She was, I did an article about her several years ago. She was 43 at the time. I think she's 43 at the time. I don't know how old she is now. She's nearly 50. But she was complaining about the fact that, well, she can't find any man out there who wants to date her because all the men are too intimidated by her. They need to be the ones to step up and date her. Where have we heard that message before? In the church. And that was the thing. Not understanding that Charlize Theron has, I believe, 2 kids that are not hers. She literally bought them from Africa. And she's now raising both of those children from Africa who were boys. She's now raising them both as girls. And she went on to claim on record that her daughter became trans at the age of 3. And she essentially went along with the 3-year-old's wishes to be a trans woman. And she's now raising her as a trans woman. Here's what I mean by this. If you're trying to date someone who's so politically opposed to everything that you stand for, including Christianity itself, that's a non-starter for a lot of guys. A lot of guys don't want to get into a relationship with a woman who holds those type of beliefs. Because what if you do decide to, hook up with this person? Right? What if you do decide to hook up with this person and you have kids? Now, she can abort your kid at any moment without telling you, and now that's part of her belief system. So if she aborts your kid, you have to be okay with it because, it's her body, her choice, right? Or even further, let's say that you guys have a kid and you raise your kid together, but all of a sudden she decides because her ideology says so that I want to raise our boy as a girl. So our 4-year-old boy, we're going to raise as a 4-year-old girl. I'm going to put him in a dress. I'm going to give him long hair. I'm going to put him on puberty blockers. And you as a man say, whoa, 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 no. And you think that's an extreme example? We see court cases here in the United States and Canada and so many other countries of men, fathers, who are fighting that exact thing right now. To this day, they're all fighting that. Trying to prevent their sons from being raised as daughters because their parent, their mother, or whatever the case may be, wants to raise. Like, think about it like this. I'll go even a step further. We're going all the way in on this one. You guys have seen the videos and the pictures of these drag queen story hour, these drag queen shows where children are present, like young children, like 5 and younger are all children, while these 40-year-old men masquerading as women are going around twerking in front of kids and being nude in front of kids. All this really just debaucherous, evil stuff. Let me ask you this. When you see the crowds, especially the crowds that actually bring the children, are they mostly men or are they mostly women? And answer that question. Is it mostly women who are taking their children to those shows, or is it mostly men? A lot of the times you won't even see men in the picture. If you guys recall, I did an article for Bounding, I think it was like a year and a half ago, when I did the review of that Generation Drag show that's on Discovery Plus. And in that show, it was mostly women looking the way we would expect a leftist woman to look, parading their child to be a part of the drag community and doing all these things. So it's like literally perversing your child to be a part of homosexuality, of transgenderism, and all this evil, debaucherous stuff. And all I can think of is like Matthew 18:6, where it says that when Jesus says that those who cause these little ones to sin, it's better for them to have a millstone thrown around their neck and be tossed into the sea. Because when judgment comes for those people who do those things to kids, they're going to wish that someone tied a millstone around their neck and threw them into the sea. That's all I'm going to say here. That's all I can say here, because we're on the Christian show. So I have to hold back just a little bit, right? I think modern women like Taylor Swift or Kardashians walking around with wealth being bowed to, not being wealth. Yeah, and like I said, let's be very honest. And I know this even with Christian women, with so-called Christian women as well. How many Christian women idolize women like Taylor Swift and the Kardashians? Christian women who, if you look at what Taylor Swift stands for, what the Kardashians stand for, these are women who should be completely 100% opposed to everything that God stands for and that they preach, especially Kim Kardashian. But let's be honest, Taylor Swift is not that much better. But what do we see here? How many women who claim to be of God love and worship those two women? If you go to your girlfriend's or wife's Instagram page, how many Kardashians are they following right now? How many Taylor Swift songs are they listening to right now? Like I said, we're talking about women who are not of God, but are of the world, and this is what's leading to a lot of problems here. Koti's joining us here saying, talk about biblical prophecy and knowledge turns women off just being real. I have to have another personal experience here because I remember about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, I was talking about biblical prophecy to a woman, a young woman who was at the church. And we were talking a little bit about Revelation, talking about some of the things that are happening in the world. And my whole concept kind of was like, we talk about, these things that the Bible says and the Bible warns about. And it's like, if you look at what we're doing now in the world, I mean, we're getting closer and closer to that point, because this is where, if you guys remember the video, you guys have seen the video where there's this woman at like a grocery store and she's putting her hand over like the palm reader and she's paying for her groceries with her hand. And I'm just thinking like, what do we talk about here with the mark of the beast? And we're portraying this as if it's a positive, like this is something that we should be doing, right? And I was just making the correlation here. It's like, yeah, I mean, if you just look around, it's like, man, we're really starting to see this like come together. And she literally broke down and cried. Literally broke down. Now, I can say this. She seems to be a tad bit emotionally unstable. I'll just be very, very fair and genuine by saying that, by saying that. She seems like a woman who's probably, I don't want to say mentally, but emotionally unstable. Let's just put it that way. And she broke down and cried. And keep in mind, I wasn't saying like anything like horrific or anything. Like, I was really just saying, it's like, yeah, if you read the Bible and it says this and you see these things happening in the world. So it's like talking about that stuff literally caused her to break down and cry. I even tried to apologize to her later that night saying, hey, look, I wasn't like trying to like make you upset or anything. Never spoke to her again. Never spoke to her again. Just throwing that out there. So yeah, I have met those kind of women before too. And they are in the church, and a lot of them are probably in your singles class. I think that modern women want to be like Taylor. Oh yeah, I think I just read that. It says that Christopher Dominguez says here, the real problem are the hippies. Yeah, there's a movie came out not too long ago called The Jesus Revolution. It came out a couple of years ago, and it was basically a story about how in the 60s and 70s, all these hippies allegedly converted to Christ during that time period. They all became Christian and they all became saved. And it was like, hallelujah, this is such a great story. As someone born and raised in California who saw California turn in my lifetime, if we're to believe that in 1966, where California, believe it or not, some of you guys can't even fathom this. In 1966, California was a red state, like a deep red state in 1966. From this time period where all these people seemingly converted to Christianity, California went from being a super, super red state that rose Ronald Reagan, the great Republican, to becoming an uber progressive left-wing hellhole. And you have to ask yourself, well, if all these Californians turned to Jesus Christ during this time period, where is the fruit that actually happened? Or was the fruit that all these people turned to Christ and somehow became more concerned? Because that's not exactly what happened in the term of history. Now, you can argue and make the point that, well, immigration had a lot to play with that as well, too. It's like, well, we're talking about just the natives. We're not even talking about the people who came over from Mexico. There's been a lot of change in the natives as well. So where was that fruit that all these people surely did come to Jesus during that time period? Because I look back on it now, looking at what California has become, and I don't know. I don't think that was the big revival that everyone held it out to be. Let's just say that. True Christian woman would not want to date a left-wing man and vice versa. Absolutely. And you shouldn't. And like I said, if you hold those values, you shouldn't have to bend your values and your beliefs for a man or a woman. I'll put it quick here. I've seen a woman that ends babies of 8, says that wants more endless sex of any kind of more than any kind of rights. Dude, if you guys have been paying attention to this election here, like this year's election with Kamala and Trump, the number one issue from every woman who supports Kamala Harris, the number one issue in their life is abortion. I mentioned this on Twitter. If you guys follow me on Twitter, it is absolutely sad and pathetic that all of these women are the hill that they're deciding to die on. We're dealing with inflation, a terrible economy, possible war in the Middle East, all of these crazy things that are happening in the world right now. And the thing that you're most concerned about is being able to kill your baby after you go sleep with some guy at a bar and get knocked up and you don't want the responsibility of raising a kid. That's the number one issue in your life right now. But hey, it's the men's fault if they're single. It's the men's fault. And so the men need to do better, clearly. Megan Fox is very attractive, pure evil, though. Absolutely. If your woman is my wife. Smart answer. Those women who want to play the whore, they see babies trying to tie them to slavery or motherhood. Absolutely. Fake is also a turn off. African shopping, yeah, she's another. Like I said, I heard some stories about Madonna's kids too. I think Madonna's oldest kid that she bought from Africa is also gay as well. And it's like, oh, I wonder how that happened. I wonder how all of these children that Hollywood spent 20 years buying from other countries, they're all gay and trans now. How did that? It's a mirror. No one knows. No one knows. It's like, yeah. There aren't enough millstones. Yeah, exactly. That should be a saying. We need more millstones. I think Israel is surfacing areas, bad times of practice of sacrifice. The firstborn was a blessing for more than a kid, and it seems like these people are doing a similar tax. That they did it all for Moloch and Baal. I've heard a lot of women fire up Swiss music in the cars while leaving church. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what modern songs are for Christian music. A bunch of long-haired friends of Jesus. Where's that fruit in San Francisco? Yeah, was it in San Francisco? Was it in Oakland? Was it in Los Angeles? Like, where did the fruit of that come from? That's all I'm saying there. We'll wrap it up with a couple of more issues, and then we'll end things here. Another reason, like I said, the men are the ones getting the blame for singleness in the church for both men and women. Yet nobody's talking about the fact that it's the women who are rejecting the men in the church. It's not the other way around. It's not the men that are rejecting the women. The women are rejecting the men. The men are actually trying to find a wife or find a mate in these churches, but the women's are the ones rejecting them. And I know there's a stat out there. I don't have it on me, but I have heard this stat repeated a few times here that if you look at modern women, apparently like 80% of the women are only attracted to 20% of the men. And the problem that lies to is that essentially modern women today find more than 3/4 of all men unattractive. So if you're just playing the numbers game based off of that alone, you're not going to find a woman who's going to find you suitable in any way, shape, or form. Because if a woman is not even attractive to you, at that point, it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter, how stable you are, how you're a godly man. You can be a godly man, volunteering at the church and doing all these things for the church and staying in the word and staying with God and being a shining example of a godly man in church. If she's not attracted to you, she doesn't care. And then again, another harsh reality, but that's what we're seeing here. Women and men are single because the women don't want the men. That's what's happening here. Here's another big thing too. I think we're going to end with this one here. This will be the biggest one. And this is another elephant in the room that a lot of people don't want to talk about. Single men fear marriage, not because they're so addicted to porn and video games they won't get out and get married. The thing that they fear the most is divorce. And here's the thing about divorce and marriage, and we'll end it on here. If you read the Bible, and by all means, if you think that I'm wrong about this, feel free to correct me. But here's what I've understood reading the Bible, is that marriage and divorce was always led by the man. Here's what I mean by this. If you go back to the Old Testament, here's how marriage worked in the eyes of God and in the eyes of that time period. A man would choose his wife, It wasn't the other way around. It was the man would look for a wife. He would find someone that he wanted to make his wife, and he would pick his wife. So the man was the one who chose his wife during that time period. And the way that this worked is that if a man found a woman that he found attractive that he wanted to make his wife, he would then negotiate with the woman's father to take his daughter to be his wife, to be given away in marriage. This is why to this day, a lot of people don't even understand this. This is why as a man, you still ask for the girl's father's permission to marry a woman before you actually pop the question, right? Because the whole idea here is that the men picked the woman, then he went to negotiate with the father, and the father would negotiate to give away his woman in marriage. So you think to yourself like, oh, well, where's the vetting process? What if this guy's a sleazebag? What if this guy is this and that? That's the whole purpose of the father. The father there was to protect his daughter from unwanted marriage proposals so that he can filter through the men and find someone that he believed was worthy enough to marry his daughter. That's the way that it used to work back then, right? So when the father then approved of the guy wanting to marry his daughter, he would then go to the woman, they would get married, and then they would be bound in marriage, man and a wife. That's how it used to work. Now, depending on what country you're from, what region of the world you're from, there's still some elements to this. But here in the West, this whole idea has been lambasted and rebuked as, you know, the whole idea of quote unquote an arranged marriage, because the whole argument against arranged marriages is, oh, well, that's not fair to the woman, because what if the woman doesn't want to marry him? What if there's some Prince Charming out there that she really wants to get married to, but you're forcing him to marry some other man? That's not fair to her. And we spent many years rebelling against this idea of the way that marriages worked. So if you fast forward to those times where, like I said, it was the man picking his wife and the man choosing his wife, thousands of years later, now here we are, and everything's been completely flipped. It's no longer the man who's picking his wife in marriage. Now, of course, a man has to propose to a woman. That's still true. But when it comes to fundamentally being in a relationship, it's not the man who's picking to be in a relationship with a woman anymore. It's women who are picking their men to be who they're essentially in our society now. The women are now picking their husbands. It is completely flipped from the way that things were supposed to be. And on top of that, if you go into the Bible, especially there's certain verses in the Bible that talk about specifically divorce. Divorce was always supposed to be driven by who? The man. Here's an example of this. Let me pull this up here because I want to highlight this here for a second. Where is it here? There we go. I want to highlight this here just real quick. So let me get it up so you guys can see it. I'll go to Luke here just real quick. Luke 16 and 18 here. This is Jesus talking, and it says that whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Whoever marries her who is divorced from her husband commits adultery. So what is being portrayed here? That if you divorce your wife, saying that you made a bond to be with your wife, but you're not breaking that bond. If you marry another woman, if you broke that bond with your previous wife, you're committing adultery. On the same token, if you marry a woman who is divorced from her husband, you also commit adultery. So in the eyes of God, if you marry a divorced woman, it is viewed as a sin because that divorced woman made a vow with somebody else. So obviously here, if you look into that verse, I think I might have had one more too. Oh, there you go. Here's the second one that I want to highlight to you guys as well. We're going to jump to 1 Corinthians as well. Keep your marriage vows. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 10 through 11. It says, listen to the wording of this. Now to the married I commanded, yet not I, but the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and a husband is not to divorce his wife. Now, the only loophole out of marriage that Jesus gave in the New Testament is the realm of sexual immorality. He was talking about if your wife cheats on you or sleeps with another man or is immoral with another man and has broken her vow, you then have the right to divorce her with no fault to you, right? That was the whole point of divorce there. And it says here that even in Paul saying in 1 Corinthians that a wife is not to depart from her husband, but if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. So in the eyes of God, you're married to the first person that you got married to. It doesn't matter if you've been married 7 or 8 times. You made a vow with that one person, and that's the person that either, if you're going to divorce, it says here that you either remain unmarried, you don't get married again, or you reconcile with the person you made the vow with in the first place. But what are we seeing here in the world today? What are we seeing here in the world today? We're seeing here that it's not men who are driving divorce anymore. It is women who are driving divorce. As a matter of fact, in our society right now, 70%, so nearly 3/4 of all divorces are driven by women in our day right now. And what's happened is that as the government and the law has come into play in the bond of marriage, that now there are incentives out there for women to not only get divorced, but break up their homes, break up their families, because, hey, if you divorce that guy, then he'll have to pay you out money because he needs to have marital support for you. So if you divorce him, you'll get most of his stuff. You'll get, the house, you'll get, the payments, you'll get all these things. So there's now an incentive out there for women to get divorced, right? And obviously, these secular women who don't respect the sacredity of marriage, they're going to go out there and just marry somebody else because they're not listening to the words of God. They're not listening to God saying that if you get divorced, don't get married again. They're going to go find somebody else. And then when they break up with him, same cycle. Same thing with child support. If you get divorced and you leave your husband and you guys have kids, well, now you can make him pay for child supports, financial support for him. So now you get money as a wife and you get money for them having kids as well. So there's a lot of advantages within the law for a woman to divorce her or her husband. That was not the way that God intended. So what marriage is today, in a lot of ways, is absolutely not at all what God intended marriage to be. But because the church is just leading this whole idea of marriage, which is very, very dated even in our society now, we're just sitting here telling more men to get married, but the men are now looking at the risk of getting married, especially getting ready to marry to the wrong person, and they're like, I cannot take the risk of marrying someone, having kids with this person, and then things going bad, and then in 5 years, I'm out. Not only my wife, I'm out children, and I'm out financially as well. They're looking at the long game. They're saying to themselves, this no longer benefits me. I don't want to be a part of the system. That's another big reason why a lot of single men are not getting married to women. Once again, they're not living at their home, playing video games in their mother's basement. They're not addicted to porn. They're seeing the landscape, and there's like, not only can I not find a wife, if I don't find the right one, it is going to horrifically have a negative impact on my life, and I'd rather not deal with that at all. That is what's happening here between single men and single women, and unfortunately the church is not recognizing that. So what they're doing is that they're just pointing the finger at the men who are already under the gun by modern laws, and no one is speaking for them in the church, because the church isn't speaking for men in general. They're speaking for women. You see one pastor after another, they're all speaking when women are unhappy, when women are not meeting their needs. But when a man's not getting his needs met, is anyone at the church speaking for him? No. And what happens? After a while, when you realize that, you tend to leave the church. And I've seen people not only leave the church, some of them have even tried to leave the faith altogether. Because it's like, oh, Christianity are all these rules, but the women aren't even following these rules. So it's like, why should I follow these rules? And they fall out altogether. And this is what happens when the structure of the church is completely broken. And this is happening in multiple churches, whether the Prosperity Church or the Reformed Church or the Independent Baptist Church. If all these things are happening and we're seeing them, that means that the foundation of the church is fundamentally broken and that there is a problem here. And this is happening everywhere. It's not just here. You're even seeing Catholics having a problem with this. Now, Catholics, with them, divorce is more, frowned upon than a lot of the Protestant denominations. I'll point out to them as well. But as you see here, there's also a lot of issues going on there because they're losing men in the Catholic Church just as much as the Protestant churches are as well. So the problems are not completely separated from them either. You're seeing this all around the board. Now, here's the one thing, I guess it could be a slight white pill for you guys listening to this. Now, I'm going to be very, very clear about this. I'm not saying that if you're single right now that this is absolutely going to happen to you, but understand that there's a lot of guys who are struggling right now with being single. A lot of guys don't feel like that they're being heard right now. but there may be a spiritual reason behind this. And what I mean by this, let's go to the book of Revelation. This is how we're going to end things here tonight. Revelation 14, I want to read verses 1 through 5. It's talking about the Lamb, Jesus, and the 144,000. I understand this. And then look and behold, the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like a voice of many waters, that in the voice of the loud thunder I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang it where the new song were before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except for the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These were the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins, and they were the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb, and that their mouths were found no deceit. They were found without fault before the throne of God. And let me be very, very clear here to a lot of you guys here. What we're seeing now with men and women, and there's a clear divide and it's growing, there may actually be a spiritual reason behind this, because in order for Revelation to be fulfilled, in order to that tribulation time period that we've talked about many times on the show to be fulfilled, there has to be 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel represented, and they're all men and they're all virgins. Now, how would that work? Well, if we're at a point right now where men are finding themselves not attracted by women or not attracted to, whatever the case may be, that, you know, they've looked at the dating realm and they've simply given up on it, there may be a spiritual reason behind this. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if you're a virgin right now, if you can't find a woman right now, that you're one of these people. I'm not going to sit here and say that, because obviously the Bible tells us exactly who these people are. There are 12 tribes, 12,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. That's no guarantee that you're going to be a part of that group. No point, you're not going to be a part of that group. What I'm saying here is that if this is happening right now, then it's happening for a reason. And all of these things that you are suffering with right now, God knows the things that you're suffering with. God knows the things that you're struggling with right now. Even if the church doesn't understand what you're going through, Jesus does. And as you see here, Jesus has a plan for the men out there who are fully committed to him, even if they're not currently committed to a woman right now. So the church may tell you that there's something wrong with you. The church may tell you that you need to step up and you need to do this and you need to do that. That's not what God's telling you. Because in the Bible, when it talks about singleness, Paul even says that being single is a gift from God. A lot of people in the church don't ever read that whole point, that being single is a gift for God. There is a gift in being single and being alone, but being focused on Christ. There is a gift in that. And you can do all things godly, and you can keep your eyes fixed on heaven rather than the things of the world. And if the women of the world are becoming more and more like the world, don't be discouraged by that, because at the end of the day, understand that the reason why you're experiencing the things that are happening right now is that you may be very close to a time period where Jesus is coming to collect his church. And the only way to assure that you're going to be a part of that is to make sure that you have your faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who atoned for your sins. The Son of God came down here to save you. And there may be a lot of people in the world who will look down on you for your faith. We talked about this last week as well, how people are killed quite literally for having faith in Jesus. And maybe the world of women are going to look down to you because you're actually a godly man trying to do things the right way. I'm going to use this as a little point of encouragement for men who probably won't hear it from anybody else. Don't look at what's happening in your situation right now and be discouraged, because there could be a very spiritual reason behind it. And if we are closer to this time, that we're talking about here, that if you hold out for just a little bit longer, God may reward you for your faithfulness. Even though you didn't get exactly what you wanted out of this world here, his plan for you in eternity is far greater than anything you can think about here on this world. And that's my white pill to end this show here for tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and read some of these comments that I missed out on. Then we're gonna wrap things up and tell you what I got coming out next week on this show. So hey, somebody said, yeah, it doesn't say if you can't pick your wife, but you can pick your nose. Exactly, right? It says many women are proposing to men. I don't understand that. Yeah, I don't understand that at all. So I had to ask my wife's father first. Like I said, that's the way that we're all supposed to do things. And then, you know, we went and tore all that apart. We get pregnant. Heck, maybe it's not ours. And then she takes all my assets. I've heard that from so many people, and it's sad, right? Because like I said, if that's your experience, and then you go to the church and the church is siding with the woman, like what do you think is going to happen to the perspective of the man at that point? Well, when, like I said, the Jezebels have taken over the church. Let me make sure I get some more here. Says that it's not a common trend for women in their 40s and 50s childless to just hope that to just leave hoping trying something else. Says my mom and dad divorced. He was involved in sexual immorality. He was beating us. Our pastor told us that divorce was okay per the Bible. She didn't remarry. She went on 2 dates afterwards. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say that every man's a winner. I'm not going to sit here and do that now. Like I said, there's a lot of scummy guys out there too. So don't think that, I'm just keeping up for all guys. I did basically start this whole show saying that, yeah, I don't believe you should listen to Andrew Tate either on that whole note. Because we can talk about those Islamic laws too, because if you think that the Christianity level is bad, you just see what Islam is doing to their women. It's not great. It's sad that the battle of the sexes has taken over the churches. Yep. Yeah, so it says she left and I learned that I was just a tool to get out of town. I didn't want to leave town. She hooked up again and got married a year and a half later. Yep, there's a lot of guys unfortunately who have fallen for that. Thankfully no kids, didn't lose any of my assets, clean split. It's like, it sounds like you got out pretty lucky there. It's the Matrix. The master wasn't married. It's perfectly fine for a servant to be single too. Drake says, praise the Lord. Yeah, Andrew Tate. Like, if you didn't start off my early part of that show, you go back and listen to what I said at the very beginning. So this went a little bit longer than I thought it was going to go, but I mean, like I said, there's so much to talk about here. Honestly, I can do even a second part of this because I think that there's some aspects of this that I didn't even cover here tonight, but I really wanted to hit home on this because, like I said, I feel like there's only one voice, I should say, that's being heard in churches, and it's not the voice of the men who are actually struggling there. So that was kind of the point of doing this episode. We're going to stop here tonight there. Thank you guys for listening. Letting you guys know what I got coming up here. So what is the next week's episode going to be about? Episode 67. Shagsworth, who joined us a couple of weeks ago, said that he wanted to come back because he wanted to talk about biblical prophecy. So we agreed that this week will be a good week to come back and talk. I mean, next week, I should say, it could be a good week to come talk about biblical prophecy. And Spencer is also going to join us on that show here too. So next week, Spencer and Shagsworth, two, I like to call them Finch sitters, who are not really agnostic, but they're not really completely throwing away the idea of God and Jesus. They want to hear about biblical prophecy. So we're going to talk about that next week here on the show. Be a very, very interesting discussion with those two. So that's what we're going to do next Sunday night. Tuesday, we got the ballroom coming up again. I'm switching over platforms because obviously StreamYard doubled their price last month. So I have to find a new platform home. I'm working on that right now. We're working on it, doing pretty well with that at the moment. We'll see about how we can get that going here later. But so the ballroom will still be on Tuesday night. This coming Friday, we will not be doing a Friday night movie club. However, there will be a show on Friday. Friday at about 7, I believe the time that we agreed on. Nerdigans is joining us. Nerdigans from our ballroom podcast is going to join us on Friday night. We're going to do a retro wave series over the next couple of weeks talking about the Pokemon manga, because obviously Nerdigans is a huge mark for manga series. She does all kinds of reviews on her channel. We want to go back. Some of you guys may know about the Pokemon cartoon and the animated series and then the card game. Not a lot of people know about the manga. We're going to talk about that on Friday night. So Friday will be a nice little change of pace here with that, talking about some things. Like I said, retro wave stuff, nostalgia stuff, that's what the whole show is about. So that's what we're going to be doing on Friday. So we'll have some very, very interesting shows. And like I said, next week we'll be back here with Spencer and with Shagsworth as well. So thank you guys very much for listening to the stream here. To everyone who joined us here tonight. Drake, Leslie Tarkin, awesome one. Kote, Cider, who was here earlier. Eddie Brock, who was here with us earlier. David, Christopher Dominguez. Vanya, obviously. Maurice Johnson. I want to make sure I get everyone who joined us and listened to this show. Thank you guys very much for joining us here. We're going to sign off now. I will see you guys Tuesday night. If not, I will see you guys on Friday night. If not, I'll see you guys next week here on this show. So adios, goodbye, and we're going to hit the outro. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Once I turned to Jesus and I realized how he had changed my outlook on life, not just softball, but understanding how much I have to live for, and that's living to exemplify the kingdom. And I think that brings so much freedom.
David, I know, share a strong faith. How does that help you on a night like tonight?
It's everything. Christ's resurrection is everything. Not just his life, but his death and resurrection. You can only get that through him, the Holy Spirit only through him. No false prophets, no Muhammad, no anyone else. Only Jesus Christ himself.
Let me tell you one more thing. This might be the most important thing you'll ever hear. There is true freedom, a freedom that no one can take from you in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Don't ever forget that. If you remember one thing I say, remember that.
And I've got lots to tell you. Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved.
Is that your reaction to what people who want you off this property shortly?
Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved.
And what about you being stripped of your belt? I mean, that's you must be very unhappy with that. What's your reaction to that?
Jesus loves me. He loves you too, and he loves you too. He loves these people in here, and he loves everybody in the world. All you've got to do is repent of your sins, and you will be forgiven.